Thank you all so much. I have to say I'm somewhat intimidated. We have some brilliant speakers and theologians and wise people, and I'm a kid from Flushing, and I've committed my life to the poor, but I don't have such depth and wisdom that they have, but I'll share with you what I have, which is a deep love and commitment to the poor, and in that, God has shown me his mercy, and to the thousands of kids at Covenant House. I'd like to start, as I often do, thinking about 1985. It was mentioned that I opened up our Rites of Passage program in 1985. That's our long-term treatment program. We were just taking kids off the street and giving them hot meal and letting them stay for a couple of weeks. And we realized that many of our kids needed so much more. So we opened up our Rites of Passage program, and we had our first 5 kids coming in. And I was honored because they asked me to give the first night meeting. That's an important thing at Covenant House. It's where we talk to the kids and jazz them up and challenge them and show them kindness and mercy too. So this was the first night, right? So I was really excited, and I really did my homework, and I was going to play. I had a tape player. Back in those days, there's a tape player. Do you know it? It's the thing that goes, yeah, you do. Okay, good, just checking. Tape player. And I had to dream the impossible dream, right? And they were going to love me. I mean, I was going to really wow them, right? But I had a moment of God's grace and mercy. And I saw their faces. And I knew their stories. Jose, who lived behind a dumpster, we called it a Dempsey dumpster. I think that was the name of it, a dumpster, for 30 days, trying to survive, and he wanted a future. He wanted to believe in himself. He wanted to believe that there was kindness in the world. Another young man, Mikey, who lived in a drug-infested home. Everybody was doing crack. At the time, that was the drug. And he didn't want to. He didn't want to. James, who lived in Staten Island, and all his brothers were in Rikers. And he had a little bit of hope that he wasn't going that way. And I wanted them to love me. Pierre, who told us when he came to us, "Where did you live, Pierre?" He said, "I live here and there on the Lower East Side." We knew that meant prostitution. We knew that at Covenant House. And they had a little bit of hope to see the light and to believe in themselves. And here I was, wanting to play my tape, right, and have them love me. And often God's mercy, I don't know about your life, but for me it's often a bit of a grab. It's not always a rainbow and the sunshine. Sometimes it's that depth, right? And I was like, oh my God. Well, in God's mercy, thank God, they never heard to dream the impossible dream. They didn't hear it. What they did do was share their stories, their suffering, their pain, their hopes, and their belief that somehow through God's grace, they could find a place to stand. You gotta get out of the way, Jim, was the message that rang in my heart. You gotta get out of the way. And I think of St. Francis, make me an instrument of your peace. And I think of the instrument as a flute, and it's hollow. And you gotta get the middle stuff out so that the wind and the spirit can make its music. And I have to get out of the way. So somehow, through God's grace, God's mercy, God can do what God can do. A bite. 1985, that's a while ago. And yet, I'm mindful of those gentlemen's faces, those hopes and dreams and those faces. And so before I speak, I ask God to help me get out of the way. And somehow, through God's grace and mercy, what is shared is what is needed. And let God do what God does and get out of the way. So that's my prayer in this moment as I present to you. When you give yourself to the poor and to God, wonderful things can happen. Great insights if you can get out of the way. And so that's my prayer for this time together before I speak to you. The other thing I'm mindful of in this work at Covenant House I've been doing it for 33 years. And in Covenant House, we have a little thing. You know how dog years are 7 years? You know, for every year you get 7 years. Well, in Covenant House, we have 3 years for every year you work there, because it's difficult work. So I'm 99 years at Covenant House. It's pretty, I think I got a world's record here in the building, right? Yeah. I'll tell you a couple of secrets about, because you're brothers and sisters in this faith. So I'm going to kind of tell you the way that we often see it. If you work at Covenant House and a kid comes in and you think that you know that they're going to make it or they're not going to make it, then you don't belong at Covenant House. Because that's God's job. Our job is to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to be there with them in their darkness and let God do what God does. And often when you get older in the work, you start to think you know something. You think you know the kid who's going to make it. So you run around and give him a little extra. And the kid who you don't think is going to make it, you pull a little off the table. That's not God's mercy. His mercy endures forever with everything that we have. So we need to go to each young person. And some of our young people, they don't believe in themselves and they leave. They come to Covenant House and then they go back out on the street. And they come to Covenant House and then they go back out on the street. Or sometimes we have to ask them to leave because they're acting like street at Covenant House. But every time they come back, we have to be, as we learned in the gospel, the father who runs down the road to see his son who's come home. And you can only do that if you stand in faith. You can only do that as you stand in faith. So faith is such an important part of our work, to do it well, because you can punch the clock. But that doesn't bring about God's mercy. I want to talk to you a little bit about Covenant House. Some of you know, some of you are faithful supporters of ours, and we appreciate that. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about our kids and what we do and how we try to love them and be a reflection of God's love to them. Our mission statement calls us to, first thing, it says, we who believe in God's providence. See, we know that, we're just a piece. I grew up in Queens, and my mother's this Irish woman, and so you guys will get this, those who are Irish. She was a tough gal. And she had 6 kids in 7 years, so guess what? You walk the line, right? And the wonderful thing about my mom is, you knew you were special. You were divine and you were special, right? And you were her baby and she was your mom. But there was another side too. Then I'd say, hey mom, how does this look? And she'd say, nobody's looking at you. And then I'd say, there's Irish moms in the audience, they're so great. And then I'd say, mom, does this match? And she'd say, walk fast, no one's looking at you. Walk fast, no one's looking at you. I took that with me to Covenant House. Here's the message. You are a very important piece. You're just a piece. You're just a piece. And how about we learn that in our faith? That we are divine and that God lives within us and that we're sinners. We have to be able to hold the paradox of that. And at Covenant House, we have to do that. That our work and how we come to work and that we need to come faithful is essential to be a reflection of God's love. But get over yourself. You're just a piece. An important piece, but just a piece. Because it takes us all. And we do have to have the humility to get out of the way so that God can do what God can do. I've worked at Covenant House. I've had almost every job at Covenant House. And I'm honored to be part of it. And I'm just a piece. I'm just a piece. This year at Covenant House with New York and New Jersey, we'll serve over 5,000 homeless and runaway kids who come to our doors. 5,000 who will come to our door. And we'll let them in. I wish I could say we had 3. Wouldn't that be great? We had 3 kids who came. But 5,000 came. And here's some of the magic that we know about Covenant House. It's first that we recognize God's providence and fidelity to his people. That is the first and paramount thing, and trusting in God's mercy. The other thing is that any kid who comes to Covenant House can't be mandated or forced to come to Covenant House. They have to come on their own, free will, with a deep desire to leave the streets. That's essential. and we make a covenant with them. Ezekiel's beautiful line. I have made a covenant with you, and you are mine. You are mine. This love relationship that we learn from our God. And that's our challenge, to do that for every young person who comes through our doors. No kid is forced to come. It's this relationship. It's this agreement. And because we open up our doors, guess what we get? Everything. We get kids. I just want to try to give you a little sense of this. If you were out on the street for a day, you probably could hold your moral compass together. 2 days, you can't. You're stealing food. You're sneaking into a place you don't belong. 3 days, you're looking to belong, protection, possibly a gang. You're selling drugs, you're doing drugs. That's the life of the street. You're selling yourself, you're in prostitution. And so when you're out there on the streets, our job is to reach out. So we have outreach vans that go out and try to connect. There's such bad voices in kids' heads out on the street. We need to be that voice of hope, of redemption, of mercy. Mercy. So that's one of the key things that we try to do. We just did a big study in New York with Fordham University. 25% of our kids have performed sexual acts for basic needs of food and shelter. 15% of our kids have been trafficked. That means 700 kids last year that came to Covenant House were victims of trafficking. Bishop said something really profound, and I was writing it on my notes. I was taking notes. And so this whole thing is different because he inspired me. He said there's a complacency, that piece of complacency for our faith and for the call for God's mercy. I think that's what Covenant House is such a gift, because we see such horror, such horror. You have to go to your knees. You have to go to something beyond yourself. That you know that just within your own mind or within your own working, the words just aren't going to be enough to transcend the pain and the horror. And you find yourself on your knees praying for God's grace and God's mercy. We provide as much as we can, and I'm very proud of what we do. Education, job readiness, mental health, legal services, medical services, recreation, all sorts of opportunities. That's not our magic. What our magic is relationship. Our magic is caring about the young person. It's wanting to get to know who they are with no judgment and accepting them for the divinity that is within. The divinity that is within. That is the call of us. That's the call of our work. To trust and to stand in the faith and to somehow, through God's grace, be a reflection of God's love to our young people. To our young people. We've learned something about this work, and I think it is an insight into this faith journey that we as Catholics are called to. And that's a willingness and an ability to hold the pain. To hold the pain. To hold the suffering, perhaps within our own lives. The difficulties, the challenges, to not to negate it and push it away, to not to try to push it and to the side and just put on a happy face. That somehow, through this paschal mystery, right? This is what we've learned. This is the core of our faith. In the dying is the rising. And that we need to stay and hold that. I wish I could explain that better. Maybe we should get some of the other speakers out here who could do a better job than I could do. But I know it. I know it, and you probably know it too. A willingness to stand in the darkness next to those, or your own suffering, or your own pain, perhaps addiction. I don't know what yours is. But it is that invitation to stand in that, hold it, and know that God is working in it too. The whole thing. That God's mercy is in the whole thing. Julian of Norwich, this is where I'm going to try a little bit. Says a beautiful thing. First, there's the fall. And then there's the recovery of the fall. And God's mercy holds it all. God's mercy holds it all. So sometimes the pain and the difficulty, not sometimes, God's working in it all. And we need to have that to work at Covenant House. Because there's some days you want to stay in bed and throw the covers over your head and stay there, right? Because it can be so difficult. And so that we have to stand there and rely on God's mercy in the darkness and the difficulties and the pain. And sometimes, in God's grace, it reflects back to us and overwhelms us. I think of Darnell, a young guy that I worked with. Horrific life. As a young boy, he saw his mother murder his father. And then, not too long after that, he was left with his two brothers, and his mom said, "I'm just going out for a bit," and never came back, and he never saw her again. He then spent much of his life in the foster care system. About 35% of the kids who come to Covenant House come out of the foster care system. They age out, they're 18, they're given their bag, and they're on their own. And very quickly they end up homeless. And any of you who are parents of an 18-year-old, could you imagine giving them their suitcase and pushing them down the driveway? That's funny, right? They wouldn't make it to the curb, at least mine wouldn't. They wouldn't make it to the curb. They'd be back asking for $5 for the bus. In foster care, they give the kid a bag and they're on their own. So Darnell bounced, and he bounced with this lump and this pain in his heart. But he was a kid of faith. So strange. Why would Darnell have faith when the primary people who were supposed to wrap around him and love him walked away? Why would he have faith? Unbelievable faith. God's mercy. That's why. And I sat down with Darnell. I remember it. And he said to me, "You know, I wonder why my mom left. I wonder where she is." And I was like, "Oh, here we go." Right? Because I've been to this rodeo. I know what's going to happen. He's going to say, "Why did she leave me? Didn't she love me? Doesn't she care about me?" And he'd be right, right? He didn't say it. You know what he said? "I wish I could see my mom." Why? Because I want her to know I'm okay. Because I want her to know she's forgiven. And how hard it must have been. I understand how hard it must have been to leave me and my brothers. That's faith. That's God's mercy. I can't tell you a lot about all the saints, but I can tell you about that one. A young boy who's in prayer. And he, you know, here I am counseling him, right? Hello. Yeah. I'm taking out my spiritual notebook, writing stuff down. One day I saw him later on, and he said, "What's the matter with you?" You know, and I'm doing, you know, this one. Nobody knows the troubles I've seen. I'm saying this to Darnell, right? Because I can't balance a budget or what, I forget what the heck was going on. And he said, "You know what your problem is?" And I said, he says, "You know, you don't pray enough." Yeah. That's not what I said to him. I said, shut up. Here's what happened to Darnell. He accepted God's mercy. For a long time, he was asking himself, what was wrong with me? What was wrong with him? Was his question to himself. What did I do? Why wasn't I good enough? Right? That beating up kind of thing. A young boy of faith who transcended that. As we're called to faith, you know, as I think of that great prayer, "Lord, comfort me in my afflictions and afflict me in my comfort." You know that one? Beautiful prayer. Comfort me in my afflictions and afflict me. I hope somehow through this experience today, you get whatever you need on the side of that. Some of you may need to be comforted because you're in pain and you're suffering, and you need to know the love and the kindness and the mercy of our Jesus. You need to know that. And some of you may need a kick in the butt, right? Some of you may need to be afflicted in your comfort and called to more, to be disciples, to be forgiving. And if you're like me, and like many of the kids at Covenant House, you need to show mercy to yourself. You need to be forgiving to yourself. And for Darnell, what was transformative was his ability to forgive himself. And I know what you're saying, because I was saying it. Darnell, what are you talking about? Why do you have to forgive yourself? He had his demons. He had his demons. And only through that time of standing in God's mercy and understanding that in his own life was he able to be free. And that's the promise of our faith, to be free. Give your burdens and you will be free, right? So, as we've learned I've learned about our experience at Covenant House and its connection to mercy is one is you gotta beg for it. You gotta need it. You gotta know it. Only often when we're on our knees. And I remember the two boys, they came to me, they had lost their mother and they got disconnected to their mom. I was a young worker and I was on the phone and I found her. So I felt like, look at me, right? Getting full of myself again. Very dangerous when you do that, by the way, because you know it's coming, right? And it came, and she said, yeah, I'm their mother, and I don't want to talk to them. And I don't want to see them. You take care of them. And she hung up. So I got two boys in the lounge waiting for me to find, and I got to go and tell them that their mother doesn't want them. I found myself on my knees in the bathroom with my head on the sink saying, how do you do this? How do I do this? And I got to get out of the way and rely and trust on his mercy that endures forever. If you can hold that, if you can stand in that faith, you can be an agent of love and of mercy. You can get out of the way, as I did, shared with them, wrapped around them, wiped tears, wiped despair, saw their anger, and stood there in it, praying unceasingly. That's all I could do. And I got degrees, and I got the counseling. I read more books than you guys want to, than's out on those bookshelves, which is a lot of books out there. Holy mackerel, right? Did you see that? Which is beautiful. Read a lot. There's no answer for that. There's just God's mercy. You find yourself on your knees saying, how do you deal with the pain and the suffering of that? And you have to rely on the faithfulness that our loving God is in this too. So we have to ask for God's mercy. We have to beg for it. Because in begging, you know you really need it. And I think that's what Bishop said so brilliantly, that there's a complacency. You're not complacent at Covenant House because you're overwhelmed with the suffering and pain. You're forced to your knees. And maybe that's why we're called to work with the poor. Maybe that's why St. Francis spent so much time with the poor, and that's what he was taught. I don't know. As I told you, I don't know. I'm a kid from Queens just trying to do what I do. So we have to beg for God's mercy. We beg at Covenant House as the 5,000 young people will come this year, and I'm afraid to say that's not getting less. We also have to be merciful. We have to be merciful. We got to beg for it from our loving God, and we have to be that to the world. We have to be that in God's grace. And I find in my own life, I can't be merciful if I'm stuck with myself. I can be real merciful when I'm out of the way and I'm full of the Spirit and I know and trust that God is in my life. It's much more a spirituality of subtraction than addition. Meister Eckhart said that. Is it Meister Eckhart or Mel Brooks? I don't know. I get them confused. But one of them said it, and it's brilliant. And that is, it's a spirituality of subtraction. It's not about getting. It's about letting go. It's about getting out of the way and let God do what God does. I'm asked to talk all over the place now and help, and I just was in, some time ago, I opened up the program in Guatemala for girls who are trafficked. We started with 12. We now have 65 girls now who are cared for. Beautiful, 10-year-olds to 15-year-olds. And I was so honored to be part of that program and to build that. But I'm going to be honest with you, we're brothers and sisters in this faith journey. You get a little full of yourself. And you you gotta stay humble. And thank God I have people around me. Well, I have 4 kids, so you know how that goes. They keep you humble as heck. Whether you want to think you're kind of full of yourself or not, kids will humble the heck out of you, eh? But it is that humbling. That's the message that I just want to say. It's not that profound and as well articulated as our young people. But it is this thing. And I find that the way to be most merciful is to really recognize my own brokenness. I love this picture. There's one on my desk. I love the picture of the risen Lord standing there, fully glowing, and holes in his hands and his feet and his side. Totally transcendent and wounded. Can we stand there in our faith in that paradox of hurting and wounded and divine and special? Because I think that's what's called for all of us. To know that we're all broken and that we're all divine and that God works through us if we can get ourselves out of the way. So asking for God's mercy, begging for God's mercy, we find to be profound. And we see how that works and it shows itself. To be merciful, to be merciful. And here's the tough one. To completely trust in Jesus. To let go, let God love you. I mentioned one of the first 5 kids, Covenant House. And I worked a long time on him. I worked a lot with this kid. I got him to his place. I got him his apartment, Staten Island. We set him up. I got him a job. You know, he was one of these lawyer kids, you know, everything was a debate. Okay, here we go. Let's fight it out. Right? But a good kid. He was the kid all his brothers were in Rikers, and he didn't want to be in Rikers. So I wrapped around this kid. I got him a job. He was working at Bear Stearns at the time, back when Bear Stearns was still alive, in '85. And then later than that. And so what happened was I got the call that James had died. Yeah, I was devastated. I was a younger kid, and here I put in all this time, all this investment. And what did I get for it? Nothing. Where was God doing God's job? I did mine. I got him the apartment. I got him the job. I did the groceries. I got him all set up. I got furniture from my relatives. So I go to his funeral, his wake in Staten Island. And I'm standing in the back, and I can be honest, right? I'm pissed. You know, I am. I mean, come on, you know? There's thousands of kids. This kid I gave a lot to. So I'm standing in the back, got my arms folded, right? And a young person comes up to me. He said, are you Jim White? I said, yeah. He said, my name is Vinny. I was homeless, and James took me in. He was working. He took me in. I was homeless. I had nowhere to go. He took me in. He helped me get a job. I'm working at the church. I'm the janitor. I'd like you to introduce you to my fiance. And James spoke a lot about you. Well, shut me up. Right? Shut me up. That Jesus, that God is working in it all the time, and can we stand in that faith? Sometimes now when it gets really dark, I kind of smile. I'm like, well, he's coming. I know he's coming, but I can barely stand up anymore. I know he's coming, right? So I leave you with this thought. As we go. One request, pray for us. Pray for our kids. Say a prayer, throw it up there. Send the Spirit so that we can remain faithful in our ministry and our work. And that God is working in it all. On the worst day of all times, we, humanity, killed our loving Jesus. The worst day. It was the best day, because in that, he redeemed the world. Each one of us was redeemed in that moment. In the ugly suffering and walk to Calvary, God shows his light and gives us his divine mercy. Amen.